Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Brian O'Connell. I am the Dean of Health Sciences in Trinity College Dublin, and it is my great pleasure to introduce this afternoon the webinar of TILDA 10 Years of Impact, marking 10 years of the TILDA study. TILDA, the Irish Longitudinal Study of Aging, as you know, is a remarkable success over the last 10 years and has really shown the way in terms of studies of aging in Ireland and across the world. What I particularly admire about the TILDA research is that it doesn't just look at health and well-being, but all other aspects of growing old, including education, creative activity, economics, molecular aging, nutrition, frailty, and many, many more. Professor Roseanne Kenny and her team, along with the help of all of the participants, have built a truly remarkable resource of voices, ideas, and data that will help us to better understand and plan for aging in Ireland. So we wish TILDA every success for their next 10 years, and I know they have many exciting plans in store. Before we get into Professor Kenny's talk this afternoon, I would like to ask and invite the Provost of Trinity College, Professor Linda Doyle, to introduce Professor Kenny and to have some remarks, make some remarks about the TILDA study. Thank you, Linda.
Hi, Brian. Thank you very much. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. It is just fantastic to mark this occasion. And I believe it's a dual celebration, 10 years of TILDA producing absolutely world-class research and breaking kind of boundaries of knowledge, and 15 years since the study was established in 2006. From the beginning, it's been housed in Trinity College, generously funded by the Department of Health and Atlantic Philanthropies and Irish Life. And, you know, when I look across Trinity, there are absolutely many fantastic things that I'm proud to say we do. But I think TILDA is one of the most amazing jewels in the crown, are incredible initiatives that I have to say I'm always so proud when I hear people talk about it. And this is just a little anecdote, but I remember actually being in a shop in West Cork and picking up a pen that was in the shop at the till with TILDA written on it. And that to me kind of exemplifies the fact that TILDA is about doing amazing research. It's produced over 500 papers and reports since it started, but not keeping that amazing research just in that academic domain, but spreading it far and wide so that it actually has impact. And it really, really, I think, has changed the fabric of the health and social policy landscape in Ireland as a result. I believe that TILDA has actually informed over 250 policy and advocacy documents. That's a staggering amount. From government departments and state agencies nationally and internationally, through a range of bodies in the public and private sectors. So it's just, I think, of extraordinary impact. I often talk about the fact that why is a university here? We're here to change the world. And I think there is no better example of how cutting edge research and fantastic ideas that comes through TILDA has gone out there and changed the world. And I was just talking to Roseanne just before we started and reminded of the fact of the GAA roadshow that TILDA was involved in just before COVID. And Roseanne had reminded me that you'd gotten as far as 8 counties. And I think that actually, again, exemplifies this huge desire to do brilliant research, but to take that brilliant research and spread it far and wide. As database grows, its influence grows, and TILDA is continually forging new collaborations nationally and internationally with universities, government departments, and NGOs. And its network, I think, is just stunning and really, really impressive. I'd like to, I suppose, pay tribute to the funders again in just saying there's a lot of times, I think, when we live in the world we live in, that people don't really think for the long term. And I think one of the extraordinary things about those that fund TILDA is that real investment in the longer term, the fact it is a longitudinal study, and the fact that the understanding of thinking about the future in that longer way is just so important, so unique. So I I wish we could see more of it. And I think it's just important to say thanks again to the Department of Health, Atlantic Philanthropies and Irish Life. Tilde has an amazing team of researchers, management and administrators. I've met many of them myself, and I'm always in awe of the amazing work they do. But of course, the driving force behind Tilde is also about the study participants. And Brian just mentioned that already. And Tilde obviously would be nothing without the participants that are at the core of it, who give their time, their energy, and provide the kind of information that allow all of us to make kind of the health system in Ireland, the social and cultural fabric of the country better and better. So huge amount of gratitude to you as well, to all of you who've been involved. Before I end, I just want to say, I suppose, for me, Tilde wouldn't be where it is without the amazing input of Roseanne Kenny. So not alone is she, I think, just an incredible researcher, is completely dedicated to her patients and all she works with, is hugely articulate, and every single time I hear her speak about Tilde and the work, I learn something more and get greater insights. She has a passion and energy like no one I've ever seen, and I think huge gratitude to Roseanne and her team for driving Tilde to be the success that it is. So congratulations again on 10 years of amazing work, amazing impact, real impact that changes people's lives for the better. And with that, I'll pass over to the wonderful Roseanne Kenny.
Can I have my slides there, Carl? Thank you. And if you go back to the first slide for me, Carl, or I can do it there. Thank you very much for that most generous introduction, Provost and Dean. And welcome to our wonderful participants. Without you, we don't have a Tilde. There is no study, there's no research. And it's great for us to be able to thank you today, but also to share in a more granular way some of the aspects of Tilde that both the Provost and Dean alluded to in the context of how you have changed policy in Ireland. Why is this whole area important? And it's important because life expectancy has increased substantially over the last 200 years. The average life expectancy has doubled in that period of time. That's remarkable. Now, it's a fantastic achievement. You'll hear lots of people saying that, and of course we all echo that. But it also presents challenges, and we've particularly seen what those challenges can mean with COVID. It's unmasked a lot of that. That's not a bad thing, because in many ways it's been hard to raise awareness in this whole area, actually. And you will know as well as we do that that's the case. So that is an opportunity that we can grasp, but also this study and your participation in the study is what have helped us to actually help in the context of driving policy generally, but also for COVID and going forward. Our challenge, therefore, is to ensure not just extended lifespan, because that's happening, but healthier, happier extended lifespan. And this, of course, is in all of our interests. It's certainly in my interest. It's in the Provost's interest, the Dean's interest, and everybody who's listening, and our younger researchers as well. Now, it was touched on, the value of the study is longitudinal. And I remember once explaining to a relative of mine that the study was longitudinal, and he didn't know. He said, I don't understand what that means. But of course you do as participants. It means that the same people are repeatedly assessed over a period of time, so we can have some sense of the process. So at the beginning of the study, you had this profile. 10 years later, these things have happened to you. And now we've got this rich data set that we can go back to and ask, okay, at the beginning of this study, what was different about this person that could have predicted what happened subsequently? That's what aging process and longitudinal imply. We've done a lot of dissemination of the findings, and you mightn't be terribly familiar with that. A lot of the dissemination has been within the science community, the social sciences community, the economics community, and with policymakers. But we have also tried to disseminate our information with you, our participants, and the public generally. From a science perspective and a scholarship perspective, there have been over 500 publications from the Tilde study, but lots more goes on in the background in the context of communication, which is vitally important. And the other thing that has happened with respect to Tilde is our wide international network. So we have networked with 50 different countries, both in the context of their longitudinal studies, very similar to in some ways to elements that we collect in Tilde, and harmonized with Tilde so that we can do comparisons across the different countries, but also universities in other countries out with longitudinal studies that are doing much more exploratory work to try and slow down the aging process, or at least reverse some of the chronic diseases that we experience in aging. And now, when Tilde started and it became apparent that we needed a data set like this in Ireland, the one thing that struck me was the attitude to older persons at a societal level. The rhetoric at the time, and I do think it's changed somewhat, but not nearly enough, was that older persons are a burden to society. So one of the first things we did when it came to analysing the data was to show the remarkable contribution that older persons make to society in Ireland, economic and to the fabric of Irish society. That may appear self-evident, but trust me, when we started out on this, it was not. And also, I think we've experienced latterly this tone again in the context of, in many ways, the ageist approach that was taken to isolation of persons, particularly in the first wave of COVID. And I hope during the discussions we can come back to that a little bit. So what about the contribution of older persons to society in Ireland? Well, these are pretty remarkable data in the first instance, and I have to put my glasses on to see them accurately, that for people who worked and retired, again, this gives us a sense of longitudinal and transition of the aging process. Before retirement, 54% were looking after grandchildren. Isn't that a remarkable figure? And after retirement, same number. But the hours that older persons gave to looking after grandchildren increased by 30% after retirement to 38 hours a week on average. And there were huge benefits to the individual, to the participant, in the context of depression and better quality of life. And that goes without saying. But this figure surprised me, the high proportion who are caring for a parent or a relative. 58% of people before they retired were caring for a parent or a relative, and 49% post-retirement. And of those, 30% were providing basic functional help, helping people get to the loo, helping people dress, helping people toilet, etc. And over 80% of the care that's provided to older persons in Ireland is in fact informal care, not formal, not through the system. And of course, this is work that we've worked closely with NGOs on, because they had no data in which to put together a good business case for support for NGOs. Now, this is great. This is good news. It gets better. So after the age of 50, quality of life increases and actually peaks at around 80. And then falls off though at different rates. That's what those arrows mean. It's not all the same for everybody. Falls off at different rates. And the biggest driver, of course, for a decrease in quality of life is having a physical disability, having an illness, a chronic illness. Now, another nice good news story that we identified in Tilde was how good blue spaces are for us. looking at the sea, having a view of the sea. And I know Linda is passionate about West Cork, almost as passionate as I am about Louisburg in Mayo, where just watching the sea makes such a difference to your whole mentality. And the research supports that. Less depression, better quality of life if you have a view of the sea. You don't actually have to live beside it as long as you can see it. But of course, most of the data would support a room with a view. Now, you'll be aware, any of you who are following the media, about our input in the context of vitamin D and health outcomes. And it's well known that vitamin D, the sunshine hormone, it's not only a vitamin, it's a hormone, is really good for bone health. And there's also, over the last 20 years, been a lovely research showing that it's good for the immune system also. And more recently, there have been about 190 papers supporting its role in COVID. That's since the pandemic broke. That's remarkable. Now, virtually all of them are observational studies. What do I mean by that? We can't actually take people who are deficient in vitamin D and say, okay, we're going to keep you deficient, no vitamin D. And then another group and say, okay, we're going to treat you. And then we're going to watch who gets COVID and how bad and severely ill they are with COVID, because individuals take vitamin D through their diets. It's very transient. It's really, really hard to do that sort of a study. But observational studies have in fact shown that vitamin D levels, if they're high, and I'll show you what I mean by that, reduce the severity of COVID, probably the likelihood of getting COVID, definitely hospitalization from COVID, and probably most important of all, reduce mortality, death rates from COVID, if vitamin D levels are kept high, independent of the other risk factors. This is where we lie in Ireland in the context of vitamin D. So the level that appears to be critical is 50 and even maybe 75 nanomoles per litre. But over the age of 50, look what we're seeing here. In winter time, 60% of us don't have enough over the age of 50. We don't have enough of vitamin D in this context in our system. Just below 60% in spring, because we get it from the sun as well as from diet, but it's hard to get enough from diet. So we need lots of sun to get sufficient vitamin D, particularly as our skin gets older. And we haven't built up our reserves in winter. We've depleted everything. So therefore we're low in spring as well. Summer, we're better because, hey, a little bit of sun. Not a lot, but a little bit. And there have been reserves built up, which is why autumn isn't too bad, but still in autumn, 40% are deficient. And you can see that the deficiency rises with age. So overall in the summer, it's 30%, yes, in the 50 to 54-year-olds, but over 50% of people 80 plus are deficient in the summer. So we recommend supplementation. And because of the way Tilde has been designed, we've been actually able to look almost by county, but certainly by region at deficiency. And what this shows is that the darker colours are the higher percent, 30 up to 30%, who are very deficient. Now that's more than insufficient. It's deficient, levels of less than 30. So that's really quite low levels in the context of immunity and COVID. And as you can see, in wintertime, almost all counties have that high proportion of people who are deficient. The East Coast is doing a little bit better in spring, but still the rest of us are not. Bit better in the summer. Again, the East leads because we know they get more sunshine. We get more sunshine than the rest of the country. And then again, we're back into autumn and running back into deficiency again. I just tell you a funny anecdote. When I was presenting these slides at an international conference in Asia 2 years ago, someone put their hand up and asked me why the top of Ireland was all white in all of my slides. So I did a short political discourse on why that might be. So vitamin D is good for bone health. We know that. Vitamin D is good for immunity and COVID. We've been really working hard as a team in Tilde to actually get buy-in from the authorities to recommend vitamin D supplementation. It's not only in Ireland, but we've worked with colleagues in the UK and English Parliament and identified a number of champions there who've pushed this, and the recommendations actually happened earlier there than here in Ireland, earliest in Wales, then in Scotland, and then in England. And then our Oireachtas Health Committee did an amazing report, even more ambitious than our recommendations were with respect to the requirements for supplementation. And it's not just in over 50s, because there's other data sets showing that young people who are indoors most of the time in winter also are deficient to the tune of 18 to 25% of 25-year-olds. So the Oireachtas Health Committee had a great report, and that's being championed in government. And our recommendations are: take 1,000 international units a day, particularly in this time of year, and you should get the appropriate level of vitamin D in the system. So that's one good news message. Lovely paper came out from one of our group, and I'm not mentioning any of the researchers by name because there are too many. And over the last 10 years, there have been so many that have made all of this research happen. But this is research that's come out recently about folic acid. So folic acid, we know, is causal in spina bifida. Many countries actually supplement for folic acid. We don't here, and other countries don't, because the narrative was, well, sometimes there's a juxtaposition with vitamin B, and it can exacerbate a vitamin B deficiency, and particularly make cognitive function, brain function, cognitive decline worse. So we've just published this week an e-publication for the first time in such a large study showing that low folic acid predicts accelerated cognitive decline over the 8-year follow-up. So take folic acid. It's what you get in the Mediterranean diet, and lots of vegetables and fruits, but out with that, take supplements. Now, Brian O'Connell, our dean, now dean, was head of the dental school, and we've been doing lovely research with that school on loss of teeth, lower tooth numbers, and tooth decay, and found that tooth decay and lower numbers of teeth actually probably accelerates cognitive decline, particularly if your odontalists have no teeth. And there are lots of potential reasons for this. We can talk about that later, but the findings seem to be very, very solid and terribly important. So we should be minding our teeth with respect to decay. And there's a good literature, both from ourselves and others, showing that tooth decay is clearly associated with heart disease. So why aren't we fortifying water, if you like, or fluoridating water with fluoride? Well, the reason, allegedly, is because of a fear of osteoporosis. If you put fluoride in water, it will accelerate osteoporosis later in life. Well, that doesn't appear to be the case, because we've been able to look at that in Tilde. And remarkably, we've been actually able, because Ireland has some areas of water fluoridated, some not, we've been actually able to look at addresses over the life course, asking our dear participants where they lived for periods of time. And that's why we were asking you that. We were able to track how much exposure you've had to fluoride over that period of time. And as you know, we did a bone scan then, and we showed that actually, having examined the mouth and teeth and looked at the bone scan and knowing exposure to fluoridation, that this is not the case. And this was actually work done by Brian O'Connell and his group. So the policy influences with respect to food fortification and water are really, really strong here. Vitamin D, folic acid, and fluoridation. And what did we come across yesterday? One of the researchers sent me this, and I'm not at all ashamed at promoting the fact that Odlum Superflower yesterday announced that they're revealing a new superflower fortified with calcium, folic acid, and vitamin D. No compromise on taste. The next thing I want to talk about is metabolic syndrome. Now, metabolic syndrome is really important, probably not given enough of attention. And basically what it is, it's a cluster of interrelated risk factors for metabolic origin. And what I mean by that is it's these 5 elements: central obesity, as you can see, central obesity here, central obesity here, insulin resistance, which is like going towards being diabetic, pre-diabetic, hypertension, high blood pressure, elevated triglycerides, and reduced HDL, a type of of cholesterol. So we want HDL cholesterol to be high and triglycerides to be low to protect against arteries becoming stiff and atherosclerotic. And of course, blood pressure low. Insulin resistance isn't a good thing. And central obesity, obviously not either. So all of those 5 things are not great. Together, they make up metabolic syndrome, and it's really common in Ireland, unfortunately. 44% of men and 34% of women. And although we gave information to participants about body mass index and blood pressure and triglycerides and HDL cholesterol, I'm afraid to say that there was a slight increase in metabolic syndrome between wave 1 and wave 3 when we measured it, not a decline, although for some it declined. However, on the obesity front, there's also been really interesting data from the MRI scans we were doing. You remember we took MRI scans on over 500 of our participants. And we know from those scans that brain function, how thought, how good you're at planning, concentration is related to brain blood flow. And that obesity is associated with a reduction in brain blood flow and in brain function. But when we adjusted for exercise, we showed that those effects were muted, dampened, attenuated. And for high intensity exercise, actually not apparent at all. In other words, even if you're obese and you're exercising at a high level, you're preserving brain blood flow. Another great case for continuing physical activity, but also it gives confidence to people who are obese, who may well feel, there's no point. There certainly is a point. This is really good, hard data, new data that we didn't know before. And it's known previously by other groups that sleep it can form new brain cells. That's where we form new brain cells during sleep. This is mostly from animal studies. New brain blood vessels and new communication bridges between brain blood cells. But what we've shown in TILDA, taking that data into the human scenario, is that less than 6 hours of sleep and more than 10 hours of sleep aren't good for brain function and actually are risk factors for brain decline. Now, another policy thing we've worked on is the heart and atrial fibrillation. That's an irregularity of the heart, which is quite a common cause of stroke. And what we showed in TILDA was that 2/3 of people were on the wrong treatment, given the fact that they had atrial fibrillation to prevent stroke, or they weren't on any treatment at all. It wasn't known. We showed, therefore, as a result of that, the HSE developed a pilot study in Galway to see if palpating the pulse could be done in a GP surgery, and then identify those who might be having atrial fibrillation and send them for an electrocardiogram and ECG. And that study was shown to be positive and rolled out by the HSE and their researchers nationally. And now there is a Know Your Pulse campaign, which is really effective in terms of individuals knowing that they've atrial fibrillation, which in the context of preventing stroke is treatable once it's identified and properly treated. I love this. I love the fact that you are as young as you feel. And our data is unique in the context of these longitudinal studies in having all of these health measures, but also asking you, the participants, your attitudes towards aging. And I'm sure some of you will recognize yourselves in this. But if you see yourself negatively, if you see yourself of your age rather than a younger age, you're 50, I feel 40. You're 60, I feel 50. You're 60, I feel 60. That's what I mean. Negative perceptions are associated with accelerated decline in health. And there's evidence that exposure to positive images or role models drive improvements in health and well-being as we age. But the factors that influence the negative perceptions and the negative outcomes from feeling old are depression, loneliness, having an illness, and we know that having an illness is actually quite common. In fact, 60% of our participants overall had what we call at least one or more than one multi-morbidity. In fact, 3 or more for that number. So it's not uncommon to have, say, hypertension, arthritis, they're the common ones, less commonly diabetes, high cholesterol, etc. So multi-morbidity is not uncommon, and that impacts on people's well-being feeling, which is really why it's so important that we work on ways of slowing down multi-morbidity and changing the biology of aging. And earlier on, we were talking about the rates of aging before we came on air. And this just really nicely shows that. So musculoskeletal, our muscles and our joints, this is the rate of aging for chronological age. That's your numbers. That starts quite early, as does obviously a decline in reproduction, ability to give birth, etc. Endocrine starts a little bit after that. Gastrointestinal, our gut, from our mouth to our anus, only starts to slow around here. Kidney disease, also early, but not as early as some of the others. Cardiovascular, the heart, around here. The lungs, also simultaneous with cardiovascular. Our neurological, that's our nervous system, including our brain, it's quite late before the aging process appears to start in that system. And the pace varies not only between organs, but very much, of course, between people. These two women are 80 years of age. So what we're interested in is, why are they physically and probably cognitively and probably attitudinally different? What's driving that? And a lot of work with ourselves, but also our collaborators, has shown that it's very much about the cell and cell aging. And all we're one big lot of about 1 trillion cells. That's what we amount to. And our cells are purely about producing energy to keep us going, keep us alive. But in that energy production, we also produce toxins, which we have to get rid of. So food in, make energy, get rid of toxins. That's what all of our cells do. Now, we do that at different rates. And the damage that accrual or accumulation of those toxins do in the cell can lead to an acceleration of biological aging. And there's ways of looking at that, and we've got researchers leading groups on this. And we know that the things that make that pace of aging faster are smoking, sitting down a lot, which we're doing a lot with Zoom, etc. now, depression, loneliness, multimorbidity, having lots of chronic illnesses, low education, and metabolic syndrome. And the things that we can do to slow down biological aging are fun things: physical activity, good diet, having a positive attitude, friendship, laughter, having a purpose in life, variety, having variety in our day, and the microbiome. And I'm mentioning the microbiome because some of you have kindly shared your feces with us as part of this next pilot wave. And the microbiome is a new organ in the gut, which actually is probably really important for our overall physical and cognitive functioning and for biological aging, and can be influenced by our food intake. So what we're looking at is the mix of the bloods we took from you for biomarkers, the physiological measures we did by asking you questions and by doing different measures in the health assessment, from all of these numbers, in order to determine what are the things which drive accelerated aging. We don't want that. Normal aging, okay, I'll take that, but I'll definitely take being a super ager, and what I can do for myself to become a super ager. And finally, I want to end with the COVID story, because that's been obviously something you've contributed to hugely. And what we've seen in the COVID questionnaire, which you kindly completed for us, was resilience, and a loathing of ageism, particularly perpetrated by the media, unfortunately. Social isolation during COVID. People found that really hard, and particularly distance from grandchildren. And depression. And we know that loneliness and depression increased in some cases threefold from before COVID to the time of COVID. And again, that's the value of the longitudinal data. We were able to make those comparisons. We wouldn't have known that otherwise. Some of you gave us swabs to measure antibodies for COVID, and that data is really interesting. 7%, and this is preliminary data, not been shown before, not been presented before, except now today with you. We showed 7% of people had antibodies suggesting that they had had a COVID infection, 7% of our population in Tilde. But only 2.3% were aware they had COVID. Only 2.3% said, yeah, I had COVID, my doctor told me, or I know I had because I had these symptoms or whatever. So now we come back to the biological clocks and biological aging. What is it 10 years ago that was different about those people, which determined whether or not they had symptoms now, 10 years later, from COVID? And that's something we're currently exploring by looking at the blood samples which you have given us and measuring biological clocks and other biomarkers from those samples. And our work has shown that these are the factors which benefit the immune system: exercise, sleep, diet, including vitamin D, reduced stress, and cold water showers, I'm afraid. There's a lot of nice literature now showing the benefits of cold water immersion if you're a swimmer, or showers in the morning for enhancing immune responses to viral and bacterial infections. So all of these factors influence viral and bacterial infections, and some of them specifically target components or aspects of the immune system relevant to COVID. I kind of gave you the information that, less than 6 hours sleep doesn't seem to be very good for brain function. More than 10 hours sleep doesn't seem to be very good for brain function. So the sweet spot is probably 8 hours, 7 to 8 hours, maybe 9. But also sleep is really good for the immune system because it activates the inflammatory responses we want to be active against any infections. But it looks particularly like it's valuable in the context of COVID by activating cytokines and T cells. You hear a lot about the T cells now, particularly in the context of the newer variants, and integrin, which is kind of like a sticky substance, which is prevented from sticking the attacker, the virus in this case, during stress or when our cortisol levels are high. But at sleep, all of those hormones are low, and integrin is most active at that time. And finally, let's end with friendship, because we can do something about that, hopefully. And look at this lovely data, not from our group, but from another group, showing how strong social integration is. Look at it here. In the context of other well-known risk factors for cardiovascular disease and for death, social integration, way up there. Close relationships here. Quitting smoking. Quitting boozing. Flu vaccine, cardiac rehabilitation, taking exercise, lean versus overweight, high blood pressure treatment, and clean air. So, social integration is one of the most important risk factors for being unhealthy if we're not integrating. And if we have it, it seems to be very protective. And in Tilde, we know that volunteering, social participation, looking after grandchildren was associated with higher quality of life, less physical comorbidity, less of those diseases we were talking about, less depression. And with respect to social connectedness, physical and mental well-being are strongly linked. Loneliness and social isolation, the flip side of that, are associated with poorer quality of life, which makes sense. Rural areas are less likely to be socially isolated. Actually, social isolation is more common in urban areas. And loneliness and social isolation, this is important. They're not inevitable consequences of aging. Many older Irish adults have high levels of social connectedness into their 80s and 90s. And I'm always really cautious when I'm talking about loneliness and social isolation, because if somebody's listening and saying, I am that isolated person, what can I do about it? It's very difficult. But I'm talking to those of you who are gregarious and know of someone who might be that socially isolated person. Reach out, and reach out often, and reach out frequently, because it makes a difference. And if possible, we should all do our best not to be socially isolated, because despite what we think, our genes are only responsible for 20% of how long we're living. 80% of our lifespan is environmental factors, some of the stuff I've talked to you about today, including friendship and social connectiveness, that we have control over. So our challenge is to ensure not just extended lifespan, but healthy and happier lifespan. And I think I've shared the policy impact that we have from the TILDA data that you have provided, the impact you have made to policy in Ireland. But we have to keep trying. You know, it's not easy. This research is actually the easiest bit. The challenging bit is getting out there and persuading policymakers to change policy and to take the data on board. And this was a letter from the New England, or a paper from the New England Journal of Medicine recently with respect to COVID, as billions of dollars flow into research and development efforts aimed at controlling the virus. The pandemic response remains hamstrung by our limited understanding of how to generate effective immunity for the elderly. There is insufficient research in this space. We are navigating partially blind. We don't understand the mechanisms of immunity in older persons, what drives it, and what we can do about it to change it. Longitudinal studies are the solution. Some of you asked in your questions if there was a way that the data from TILDA has been compressed into something that's easy to access, etc. We have 500 science papers, but what we have done is put together this book, which will be launched in London by Bonnier Press on the 22nd of January. You can pre-order The New Science of Living a Longer and Healthy Life, called Age Proof. There's a lot of the TILDA data is in that, plus data from other longitudinal studies and researchers to give you control of your life and your aging process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roseanne, for that. I know it's a whistle-stop tour through the many, many aspects of TILDA. And every time I hear Roseanne speak, I learn, not only do I learn a whole bunch of new things, which is great, but that I'm going to have to start taking cold showers, but also that the impact, the practical impact that, as you say, the participants of TILDA, along with your team, have been able to generate. So I think it's much appreciated and much admired. So thank you for that. I'm fortunate for the last part of our webinar this afternoon to be joined by two other members of the TILDA team, Dr. Christine McGarrigle and Dr. Cathal McCrory. And they are going to help us to work through some of the questions that you have sent in. And I hope we can have a good discussion about that. I'll launch right into it. Cathal, maybe this might be one you might look at. It's from a participant who said that the first thing he wanted to do was congratulate TILDA on the work they're doing. I'm now almost 70 and I can see how important it is. As a young guy, I went through all the motions of life. Now I'm not that young guy anymore. I have to be a bit more careful. My brain tells me to do some things and my body is a few seconds behind. Is it normal for the brain to be a little bit slower, for the body to be a little bit slower than the brain?
So let me respond by just acknowledging first, it's an absolutely excellent question to ask. In fact, the question you've asked is perhaps one of the most fundamental questions in the field of gerontology. So essentially, you're asking whether aging is unitary or whether it's multidimensional. That is, whether all our bodily systems age at a uniform rate within the same individual, or whether they age at different rates. So I guess in your specific example, you've noticed this decoupling of your cognitive system from the physical response system. And I guess from the work we've done in TILDA, the best available evidence seems to suggest that the aging process is not uniform within a person, and that the organ systems may age at different rates. So if you just think back to the slide Roseanne showed a few minutes ago, you can see that the musculoskeletal system was deteriorating much earlier in life compared with the neurological system. And some of the work that we've done in Tilde using different measures of biological aging, these are things like allostatic load, which is a measure of physiological wear and tear on the organ systems, telomere shortening, which is a cellular marker of aging, and epigenetic aging. Actually, the correlation between those things is actually quite low, which suggests that we're aging at different rates in different bodily systems. And there was a really nice paper published in Nature Medicine last year, which used detailed biological profiling of individuals over about a 2 to 3 year time frame. And they concluded that individuals can actually have distinct aging patterns, and they referred to these as agiotypes. So, for example, they found that an individual could manifest really accelerated aging in the kidney system, but not in the liver or the metabolic or the immune system. So I guess studies like TILDA can help us understand these person-specific aging trajectories and allow us to intervene on the pathways that contribute to those differences. And I guess that's what underlies the promise of precision medicine.
Yes, thank you, Carl. As you say, something of interest to all of us, I think, sooner or later. Christine, a question you might be able to answer for us. A participant has raised about the issue about so many services going online now, and not all older people, such as banking, for example, and not all older people have maybe easy internet access or capabilities, and be able to make these connections with essential services. So what's been the experience among TILDA participants with online life, and what can they do to access it better?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That is something we actually included as a question in the last wave of TILDA, because we wanted to know that, given that a lot of services are moving online and it's clearly very important. What we found was that overall there was relatively good access. About 71% had home internet access, and it was slightly less had smartphone or tablet access, but that did decrease with age. So for instance, in the 50 to 69 year cohort, it was around 4 and 5 had internet access, but that decreased down to 38% of those aged over 80. So clearly there is a need for important services to remain in traditional methods in addition to internet. So obviously in COVID, that must have become more difficult in that there was quite a push for everything to go online. I think there are services available. In fact, two partnerships are currently ongoing, and if people wanted to increase their internet capacities, for instance, Active Aging and Alone have been developing online skills. It's a digital course called High Digital, and they're taking the courses will be sort of short, bite-sized lessons to learn about how to use the internet, how to access apps, things like that. That's a free course that will start in 2022. They have mentors volunteers who can help you along with that course, or alternatively, you could have a family member help you with it. There's also courses run by Active Aging that also have, for a number of years, have been trying to increase capacity, our internet use of older people. And they used to run in community centres and libraries, but now they've also moved online, obviously, from last year. But they do have a booklet that can be posted out to people also if they don't want to have access it directly online. And that's quite detailed. So there are resources out there, certainly for people to increase their internet abilities if they want to.
Good. Thank you, Christine. It's good to see there are those supports out there for older people. Carl, I don't know if you can shed some more light on this. We talked to Roseanne, talked a little bit, and she may want to jump in as well about how COVID has impacted, I suppose, on Tilda's research and on the participants themselves. Has it brought more older people's problems to the fore more so than before COVID?
Yeah, so I guess it's two parts. So I'll answer it in that order. In the context of how it affected the Tilde team and the researchers, as you may be aware, we were expecting everyone to come into us again for our last health wave in March of last year. We had moved to a new health centre here in Trinity College. We had the room set up, all the rooms you're familiar with, the cardiovascular room, the gait room, my least favourite, the dental room. So we had all these rooms set up and we were expecting everyone to come in, and then COVID struck, and unfortunately we had to postpone the in-person interviewing of you here. But we did move the Tilde assessment, at least the questionnaire, onto a computer, onto a telephone-based system. So we carried out the questionnaire with you using this telephone-based system. And probably what I want to say is I want to just acknowledge what Roseanne did. Roseanne actually repurposed the entire research team around that time to ensure that we could provide as much information to government as possible to ensure the most beneficial policy response in the context of COVID. So you'll be aware that some of you got a COVID supplementary questionnaire last year. That was to gather the experience of participants during COVID. You know, we tapped things like levels of loneliness and the extent to which you were missing contact with other individuals and so on. But because we had baseline information for all of you for 10 years before the pandemic struck, we could actually tell the government pretty quickly what proportion of older people are living on their own, what proportion of older people are how they contribute to their communities and so on. So I guess the whole apparatus of the team was repurposed towards that end. And then we were also successful in things like the Saliva Antibody study in Tilde, where we sent out these samples to you so individuals could provide saliva to us. They come back here and we could ascertain whether you had COVID antibodies and so on. And then we can look, considering that we have 10 years of information before the pandemic struck, we can look to see, was there particular vulnerabilities that led to some individuals being affected by COVID, whereas others might have been more resilient or more insulated against that. So that work is still very much ongoing. So I guess that's how, from my perspective, how it affected the team, but Roseanne is probably much more equipped to answer that than me.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Roseanne, you probably could get a lot of insights from that work.
That's a fantastic response. Actually, I don't think we can underscore what the team did in the context of COVID. But lots of different groups I know, and hospital groups, because I juggle between both, did a whole lot in terms of changing their lives to accommodate COVID. But this team worked literally Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and all of the other days to produce reports for government. Because at the time we didn't know, or government didn't know, well, how can we pull back on healthcare workers? There are 4 different grades of healthcare workers in the community. Can we withdraw this group and this group? Will that make any difference? They didn't know how many frail persons were reliant on what. What's the impact going to be of, I showed you how much caring there was for relatives. What's the impact going to be if we cocoon, I hate that word, cocoon people 70 and above who are providing a whole lot of care to others? Then can we as a government afford to withdraw formal care while we're also withdrawing informal care from carers because we're not allowing access, etc. So anyway, the data was hugely valuable. I think we did something like 9 or 10 reports on different aspects that government were thinking of at the time. Should we introduce this? Should we not introduce this, etc. To help inform policy. We were not responsible for the policy, and I have to say, I think as a group we felt that a lot of it was quite ageist in its approach. I did not like the fact that there was a recommendation that people over the age of 70 remain at home, many who were isolated. The implication of that was if you're 70 plus, society doesn't need you. I think we will regret that in years to come. But anyway, we helped a lot and the team were fab.
Yes, thank you, Roseanne. But at least it's heartening to know that, you know, your participants are able to provide that data and provide a basis for some kind of decision making, at least. And we just have a couple of minutes left. Christine, there's another question here I think a lot of people will be interested in. And it says that at the start of the Tilde project, I got medically checked in several respects. I would have expected those measurements would have been followed up at a later stage then to evaluate progress. However, the only assessments since then have been verbal. So what is going to happen? What's going to happen now with people who had a health assessment before? Are they going to come back in for further health assessments?
Right. So yeah, the Tilde health assessment, it doesn't happen every single wave. It happened at the first wave and then at wave 3. We had planned to do it again at wave 6, but obviously with COVID, we couldn't do that. And our questionnaire moved on to the telephone instead. So the next wave in 2022, there will be another health assessment. And so we'll have a follow-up then, and we'll also have more feedback to the participants too on those both their assessments and then how they've changed over time.
Great. So it'll be, I'm sure everyone's looking forward to seeing everybody back in person again. Roseanne, maybe just, we have time for another question. Well, 2 really. I'm going to fire 2 at you. One, you mentioned there about the forthcoming book, which is fabulous to hear about information for older people. Many people have asked where they can get simple information. What other sources of information might there be about the basic, straightforward sort of advice that you have developed from Tilde and other sources to give to older people?
In fairness, there are quite a number of books on the market now with respect to healthy aging. And the reason that we have prepared this forthcoming book, Age Proof, was simply because after the GAA lectures, so many of the audience would come up afterwards and ask us, where can I get this? Where can I get what you've presented? And it's, you know, slides don't give you sufficient in-depth information. So the book will give a lot of information, but there are a number of good books on aging and different elements of aging, and different degrees of comprehension. I would say David Sinclair, I think, has written an interesting a book which will give some insights. Tim Spector has written a lovely book on the diet myth, etc. And then, of course, we've reports from almost all of what we've discussed with respect to Tilde, and each wave we do a report with a different focus for the wave launch.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning all those reports and all the other Tilde data is accessible through the website, which is very easy and I think accessible to get. A last question for you, Roseanne, is that apparently at a lecture in Castlebar, you recommended a protein supplement to help build muscles. Could we have the name of that, please? Do you remember the name of what you recommended?
I know. Well, I know what the evidence is. The evidence is, first of all, people think, oh, protein is for young, bulky 20-year-old men in the gym. That's not the case. As we get older, we don't replace protein as we should, and that can lead to sarcopenia, which is sort of a muscle frailty disorder, and that can lead to falls. So bottom line, as we get older, we need protein supplements. Up until very recently, nutritionists would say, but we get more than enough in diet. But more recent data has shown that actually you can replace protein. And what the amino acids that are recommended are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. They're hard to get in Ireland on their own, but you can get them in whey protein, WHEY.
Right.
In a health
Thank
food
you.
store.
In a health food store, yeah, readily available, I believe. You can get that. I think we're just about at the end of our time. It's been a really great time to spend with you. We're also very proud of the work that Tilde has done, and I can see there's so much going on that we're going to hear much more from Roseanne, Cathal, Christine, and all the team at Tilde. So we very much look forward to hearing from that, and best of luck with the next wave and all the work that Tilde is doing. So thank you all very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.